What's the scariest gut feeling you had that came true? I think a gut feeling led to me not being kidnapped. I was maybe 9 at the time. I was in a department store, wandering on my own when all of a sudden the most terrible, gut-wrenching feeling came over me. I don't know how, but I knew I had to get back to my mom. I ran to the aisle she was in. A man hurriedly followed me into the aisle. When he saw I was with my mother, he stood there for a few seconds and stared at me, before walking away. I will never forget that feeling, or his terrifying face. Not me but my wife. She actually has these a couple times a year and they always come true. Here are some of the big ones from the past 3 years. Woke up in the morning with an extremely bad feeling about her dad. That night he fell and broke his neck. He died in the hospital. Had an extremely bad feeling while 18 weeks pregnant with our son. 2 weeks later we found out he had a 1 in 4,000,000 heart defect. He survived the pregnancy and received a heart transplant 2 weeks after birth, making him the first with his condition to ever survive. After a biopsy on his original heart, the doctors found that he suffered a massive heart attack at 18 weeks which caused his condition. This just happened last week. She had an extremely bad feeling about an old high school friend. She tried frantically to get in touch with him. After a week, she finally got him on the phone only to learn that he had been mugged and stabbed badly a few days prior. He has been keeping it secret and not even his family knows. Needless to say, when she gets a gut feeling she pays attention. Update. Thanks for all the comments. My son is 16 now and doing great. Lifetime meds and monthly doctor visits but he'll lead a normal life. He's healthy as can be. I worked at a hospital PRN and frequently picked up extra shifts. I worked overnights and had asked the supervisor to go ahead and put me down to work the next night. Well, as the night went on I just felt awful, like completely doomed. I had never wanted so badly to be home. I lived an hour away from my job, so by the morning I called the supervisor and asked her to remove me from the schedule. So I went home, feeling unexplainably scared. By the time I woke up I was getting calls that an EF5 tornado had hit the town I worked in and the hospital I worked at. I was talking to my mom when she was coming back from Corpus Christi, and this wave of worry came over me. I said, "Mom, be safe, alright? I'm sorry for arguing with you. I love you." Not even 30 minutes later my sister texts me that they were hit by another car. I started panicking and crying, and then she said, "But we're alright." I've never argued with my mom again. You don't know what you've got till it's gone. Couple of posts today are bringing me back to a sad place. I was going to bed and thought to myself that I should turn up my phone volume in case someone called me in the night with something serious. I had no reason at all for that kind of thinking. 5 a.m. my dad tells me my 57-year-old mom was taken to the emergency room. She died 5 days later. Fun story. Couple weeks ago, my GF knew for the first time in 4 years where she wanted to go for dinner. When we got there she dumped me. Knew something was wrong the whole time, but everything was fine when I'd ask. At one point she refused to hold my hand and I asked her one more time. "Gotta really? You want to do this here?" By the time I was 13, my mom had been battling cancer for a year and a half. It was a few days after my birthday, and she was due for an 4-port surgery the following morning. Just a simple day surgery, right? She came to my room to say goodnight, and I freaked out. For some reason, I knew this surgery would not go well. This is after she had lung surgery, and multiple bouts of chemo and radiation on her chest and brain. She reassured me that it was fine, and that we would go bowling a few days later. She never returned home. During the surgery, her remaining full lung collapsed, and it went entirely downhill from there. Just over a month later she passed away. I have no idea what caused my fear of that being the end, but unfortunately I was right. I used to work as a nurse in an old people's home. I had great contact with one of the little old ladies there. One night, after having helped her get to bed I said goodnight, "See you tomorrow," knowing I was coming in the next morning. "Oh no," she said merrily, "I don't think we'll see each other tomorrow." It felt kind of off and I went home feeling strange about it. When I came into work the next morning she had died peacefully in her sleep, no more than a few hours after I'd left her. One evening in April 2007, I went out to play soccer with friends. Just before I left my mother came back from seeing my grandparents and she looked tired, a bit gunned. Didn't sound in the best of spirits. She had suffered with depression and some troubles. I was worried for her. She died of a brain hemorrhage that evening. When I was 12, my dad was a semi-truck driver. One day after school I had a horrible feeling about him going to work the next day. I had begged him in tears to stay home from work, but he just told me that he'd be home in time for dinner the next day. He was killed in an accident with another semi early the next morning. I woke up to like 4,219,804 calls from my family. Literally everyone but my brother. I had a gut feeling something happened to him. Then my mom told me he had been in a car accident and they were still waiting for information about it. I had a gut feeling he was dead. I had never been so sure of something in my life. I'm pretty sure I went through the 5 stages of grief backwards. I started off with acceptance immediately. I pretty much accepted that he was dead even before my sister called me with the confirmation. My gut feeling was just that powerful, I guess. Not really mine, but I think it counts. My mom was going to the dentist a few years ago and she decided that she wanted to bring my brothers and I, but at the last second she said that we should stay home because she felt something wrong. Later that day I got a phone call from her and her voice was very weak, saying how I should not worry and that she would be fine. She was in a car accident and the passenger side where I always sit caved in at least 3 feet, and if I was sitting there, I would have been toast. I love you, Mom. When I was in my late teens I was hanging out with a friend in my room. Suddenly I started feeling panicky with something telling me to leave the house. I decided to listen to my gut and told my friend we had to go to the store right now. Went outside to find my dad passed out in his truck looking really sick and pale. Me and my friend pulled him out of the truck and he called 911 while I performed CPR on my dad and saved his life. Later found out he had overdosed on drugs and choked on his own vomit. Who knows what would have happened if I didn't have the overwhelming urge to walk to the store for no reason. I'm a triplet. One of my brothers bikes a lot. I got home from class one day and heard an ambulance going by. I was like, oh snapdragons, I hope my brothers are okay. Sure enough, 5 minutes later Mom called and said bicycle bro done broke his leg. This is going to sound lame, but going up the escalator one evening after my soccer practice I was thinking, what if I get up there and I see some woman get harassed by some guy? What would I do? Would I help? You know, typical kid stuff, thinking about whether or not you would do the heroic thing. I then started thinking, what if this actually happens? And I thought about it before, nobody will believe me. Then I thought, what if it does happen? And I actually thought about thinking about it, etc., all that nonsense. I was about 13 to 14 years old and it was late, really dark outside and almost nobody out. When I arrived to the top of the escalator and out of the subway I see a woman walk past. Just as I see her, a drunken man starts yelling at her, catcalling, calling names. He sounded really violent and like he could actually harm her. He started jogging drunkenly towards her and out of nowhere, without even thinking about it, I just screamed out, "Hey!" As the word came out I remember thinking, shit, you idiot, why did you do that? Now you are dead. And out of nowhere my mouth started going off again, leave her alone. Again trembling, really scared, being 13 and all, I remember feeling like I wasn't controlling my body or actions, they just happened. I was holding my soccer ball under one arm and my workout bag in my other, so wasn't really fit for running or fighting. Lol, fighting. I was 13, I was a twig at best. He turns to me and starts yelling insults. He starts walking towards me saying how he will kick my head and like he would kick that ball. I remember thinking I gotta run. But my legs refused, it felt wrong to run while she was still there. Knowing I couldn't fight or run I just kinda circled him while scared shitless until she had walked away far enough. Then as he almost caught me I jogged away in the same direction the woman went. I remember walking trembling, being really surprised at what I did because none of it was on purpose, it just happened. Words and actions came out of me like a renegade fart. Eventually when we got far enough the woman turned around and thanked me. I remember feeling like a major boss then and proud of myself. I told my parents and they didn't believe me, told my best friend and he didn't believe me. So I stopped telling anyone. BTW, this was in Sweden, in Stockholm. So if somehow randomly this woman sees this, well, hey! My brother had relentic epilepsy and while all of the doctors said it would be fine and he would grow out of it, I found myself laying awake every night unable to sleep, just focusing on the sound of his breathing and listening for a seizure. Then one night he had a seizure, and somehow I did not hear him. He died in his sleep, and it haunts me to know that I was likely laying there awake in bed unable to sleep and in the other room. His condition always scared me, yet somehow I always thought it would be my dad that would die. He's a probation officer and I feared he would be killed at his job, and I would lie awake at night crying over imagined scenarios of his death. I may not have predicted the exact course of events, but pretty much all of my childhood fears came true. Ever since then, I've been unable to dismiss feelings of dread sometimes because, well, what if something else comes true? I got out of the subway one night, kind of a cool autumn night. The kind of Halloween night that people in movies murdered on. I got the feeling that I was going to get attacked on my walk home, 5 minutes walk. Sure enough, some guy tried to rob me. Went to Dave & Buster's. Hanging out at the bar and just had a bad feeling about the people around me. 30 minutes later, a fight broke out next to me between two different parties over some girl. Got a piece of broken glass on my arm and security guards sprayed pepper spray everywhere and I caught some on my face. My mom is a nurse who works the night shift. As a child I was a worrier, always worrying. In my head I always feared that mom would get into a wreck on her way home from work. Fast forward to 2006 and I've just walked into one of my classes and my teacher calls roll. He gets to me and says, "Hon, you're on the absentee. Says you're supposed to be with your aunt." My aunt taught bio at my high school. I thought that was odd. As far as I knew, I didn't know of any reason I'd be excused from class that day. I walked to my aunt's class and her student teacher told me she had an important call, she's in the office. I knew almost immediately that it was my mom. I knew she had wrecked. At the same time I had that thought, my and my brother's name came over the PA system to report to the office. I started bawling in the doorway and the student teacher probably thought I was crazy. Got to the office and found out I was correct. My mom was cut off by a reckless driver on her way home at around 7 a.m. She spun off the road and into the forest and went down an embankment. She broke or crushed everything on her left side and the woman who ran her off the road kept driving. My mom had been passed out in her car for about 3 hours before a passing motorist saw a headlight reflect in his rearview window. He checked his mirrors but didn't see any other car on the road behind him, so he went to investigate and found my mom about 75 yards into the woods. She was in dense cover and her car was black. You couldn't see anything from the road at all, and the only reason she was found was because her busted headlight flickered and the man driving by just happened to see it. She ended up making a full recovery. Me and my friend went to the midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises. I don't live near or, but the whole night during the movie I didn't feel safe and I really wanted to leave because multiple people were dressed in costumes and I went over ways to escape the theater if anything happened. I went home later that night and heard what happened. My mom got a phone call one day, and I just got this overwhelming feeling that my dad got into a car accident. After she got off the phone, she told me she had to go, and that my dad had been in a car accident. That was the start of his downward spiral in health. My mom was really bad off. The doctors told us 2 weeks. I had a feeling that she passed after only 5 days. My sister called me maybe an hour after I was thinking about it. One of the worst was waking up from a nap in the summer when I was about 7 years old. I woke up and heard screaming and fighting. I thought my parents were watching TV, so I went to the living room and they were gone. My stomach plummeted. Then I knew he was hurting her bad. I ran to the back of the house and my mom was cowered in the corner and there was blood everywhere. My dad was wasted drunk and beating the shit out of her. That weird adrenaline thing that happens to kids happened to me and I launched myself over there by jumping on the bed. My dad was a construction worker and super buff and I started trying to beat him up to get him away from my mom. I pushed him against the wall and helped my mom up and she ran right by me and left me in there with him. He started to go after me too. Boy, am I lucky he was drunk and I was faster than fast. I never liked my father. I always said I would never treat my kids like he treated me. I always said I will never be like my father. I often expressed that it was my greatest fear in life to end up like him. I also said similar things about my stepfather. That guy simply hated me. I was so different from the rest of the family. There was a phrase I would use when things got crazy: "What am I, the milkman's son?" I said it jokingly, but I said it thousands of times over the years. Well, it turns out that I am not the milkman's son. I am the son of a corporate lawyer in NYC. My mother, stepfather, and that asshat who pretended to be my father, all knew who my father was, and they kept both me and my biological father in the dark for decades. I have only known the truth for a few years. Still trying to adjust. But in my gut, I knew something was off all those years. I knew I did not belong. I just did not fit in. I do not talk with my so-called family anymore. However, my father and I have bonded greatly, and we are trying to make up for the decades we never shared. True story, I was a freshman in high school when 9/11 happened and was kind of a worrywart. I'd always watched the news/read newspapers and had a solid understanding of who bin Laden was and what his goal was. I remember on September 10th around 11 a.m. I got a really bad feeling in my mind and went to the nurse's office. I called my mom and told her I wasn't feeling well and needed to get sent home from school. She was busy working and couldn't come get me, but said she would ask my grandfather if he could. He agreed and showed up within about 30 minutes. When I got into his car he looked at me and said, "You look fine." We talked for a good portion of the ride home and at some point I remember saying to him I thought tomorrow was going to be the day the world ended. I believed wholeheartedly we were going to be attacked on a massive scale. I'm talking nukes and all that. Obviously it wasn't that drastic, but still that next day was 9/11 and I'll never forget the feeling in my stomach during third period when my principal pulled my teacher from the classroom and she came back in and turned the TV on to see the first tower smoking. Haunting. About a month before my brother passed away I had a bad dream about my brother, who I was extremely close with, and in it he passed away. I told him about it. He brushed it off and told me he would always be around. The night before he passed away we were in his office discussing business and his last words to me were, "A change does not come through comfort. I love you." The next morning I woke up and something felt off. I got ready for school and as I was walking down the hall I noticed his door cracked, usually closed cause he's working, but if it's open and he not busy I pop in, say good morning and go on my way. This morning I saw the door cracked and I go to open it and I see my brother's feet and think to myself, what if he's dead? And I take my hand off the door, shake the thought cause it was random and walked away. I have never had that though cross my mind in my life and had no reason to. I go to school and about an hour later I get a text from my best friend asking me what's going on at my house. She said she was driving to school and saw an ambulance and cops outside of it. I told her I don't know, but the first thought that popped in my head was about my brother. About 10 minutes later I get a text from my little sister telling me I need to come home and not explaining why. I knew right then that my brother had passed away. I get home and they confirmed it. Met this girl, we hit it off really quick. We went away for winter break and I just had a feeling she was going to meet another guy. She did. 8.5 months later and I'm still hung up on it. Frown. The night before my brother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, this was only 2 weeks back. I was over at my uncle's. During the night I had this feeling of dread. I wanted to be with my father and mother, brother lives away from us. In the night I had a horrible dream. An indistinguishable figure was lying on a bed dying. I am waken up by my aunt who informs me my brother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I'd quit warranted the dream and feeling, but it was definitely something horrible. A few times. 1. Before my dad died, at age 51 with no warning, massive heart attack, I just felt off. I felt cranky and terrible, and like something bad was going to happen. My chest literally hurt for a day before he died, and I had no idea why. I had the feeling that I should stop my car before I backed out of the garage and looked behind it. Early one morning, my 3-year-old was behind it, out of bed way too early. He was fine because I stopped. My husband was on hunting trip in the wilderness, and I woke up in the middle of the night just knowing something bad had happened. I figured he had had an accident or something, and then my phone rang at 6:30 a.m. It was actually one of my best friends who had a sudden seizure due to a brain tumor, and her husband was calling to tell me she almost died, but ended up being treated with specialized chemo and is now the closest she can get to remission for her particular cancer. I was in my early 20s, alone, driving on a major highway. In the lane to my left was a semi. Right behind my right ear I heard a frantic getaway from the truck. It wasn't super loud, but it was authoritative, so not even questioning my sanity I put on my brakes and let the truck get several car lengths ahead. Within 5 to 7 seconds probably, one of the truck's tires blew out, and the truck swerved hard into the lane that I was in. Had I still been next to the truck I would have been pushed down an embankment doing 65. I wouldn't call it a gut feeling because I swear on everything that I am, I heard that voice in my ear. Zero explanation, but I'm okay with that because somehow I avoided a major accident that could have been devastating. Not me, but my dad. My family and some of my parents' friends were supposed to go abroad to take part in a wedding. The day before we were supposed to go, my dad woke up after a nightmare, in full panic. I remember thinking it was scary to see a grown-up being so afraid of a nightmare, but it resulted in us not going, and I was so mad because I had been looking forward to it for ages and told all my friends at school about it. But Dad refused to go. It was the 28th of September 1994, the country we were supposed to visit was Estonia, and the ferry we were supposed to be on sank that night. 852 people died. My dad later described the feeling as an alarm inside my body, shouting at me that this is wrong, it will not end well, don't do it. The alarm was so strong it could not be ignored. It's not like a normal worry before you make a long trip, not at all. The normal worry is like a car alarm going off on your street, you notice it but pay no attention to it and so it goes away. This was more like an explosion. I hadn't heard from my friend in over a week, totally out of the ordinary for him. I joked to my roommate at the time that maybe he died. Got a call from his sister one day out of the blue asking if I'd seen him. Turns out he had shot himself 3 days earlier and was in his dorm room until the RAs unlocked the door and found him. I've lived in South Louisiana my entire life, about an hour south of New Orleans. In July 2005, I was only 11 years old. I kept having this recurring nightmare of me lying in my backyard, staring at the sky, and suddenly a large brown wave of water, probably 30 feet high, came up and washed my entire neighborhood away. It would always end right after the wave crashed, and I would wake up. Then, Hurricane Katrina hit a month later. My hometown was out of power for 2 weeks but, thankfully no flooding. But then I had the same dream after Katrina hit, except I saw the aftermath. I kept seeing dead animals floating past me as I tried to swim to my house. When I woke up, I had this horrible feeling that something horrible was going to happen to us. Hurricane Rita was making landfall, and we were waiting it out at my house. I kept telling my mom that I wanted to go to my aunt's house, which was in the parish north of us. She said no, and told me to go back to sleep. About an hour, the levees in my town broke, and our entire town had an hour to evacuate. Most of our parish was under 6 feet of water. I lost 2 classmates, and 6 family members. When we came back, about a week later, everything was coated in mud. There were dozens of dead animals, all over the road. Most of us were homeless for years after, but at least we're alive. So now, when I tell my mom something, she listens. When I got the diagnosis for kidney failure 10 years ago, I had a gut feeling that my headaches prior to the diagnosis meant far more than an underlying blood pressure issue. Had one this week that came true yesterday. I work at the kart track at Auto Club Speedway, and on Wednesday as we were having a meeting I said to a co-worker, you know, they never did solve the catch fence problem after the Vegas race. Is it going to take another big wreck for people to get motivated again? Last night a car went into the catch fence during practice. Looks like the driver will be fine but he's hurt fairly badly. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share and we will see you in the next video.